Hello everyone, my name is Tom Letty and I'm an architect evangelist at Salesforce. This video is part of our Getting Started with Salesforce Diagrams video series, and today we're going to be talking about connectors and endpoints. Okay, so the first topic we're going to cover is, what are connectors? Essentially, a connector is a line on a diagram that connects two entities and shows some type of relationship between them. Now, this is probably the simplest connector we can draw because it's just a line. We know that these entities have some type of relationship, but we don't really know any other details about it. And this might be okay if you're creating a really high-level diagram and maybe you're showing it to an audience of executive stakeholders who don't need all the details. But if you're creating a diagram for an implementation team or for other architects to look at, you're probably going to need a lot more information than this. And that's what you would use endpoints for. Okay, but what are endpoints? Well, endpoints are the symbols on either side of a connector that tell us about the relationship, and they also tell us a little bit about the entities that are involved in it as well. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to draw half of a connector, and I'm going to add these two perpendicular lines. Now, the one that's closest to the entity tells us cardinality, or how many instances of this entity need to be in this relationship. And the line means 1. The second line tells us optionality, which means, does this entity have to be in the relationship or not? And the line means that it is required. Now on the other side, we're going to draw this circle and a crow's foot. And again, this circle means optionality, and it tells us that this entity is actually optional. The crow's foot is our cardinality, and what it means in technical terms is 0, 1, or more. But a lot of people commonly refer to it as many. And so this relationship is called a one-to-many relationship. And what we're essentially saying is that entity 1 only has one instance in the relationship, and not only that, but it has to be there. Entity 2, we can have as many as we want, or maybe even none at all. And let's think about what that would mean in terms of Salesforce. If entity 1 was an opportunity, and entity 2 was an opportunity product, we would have a one-to-many relationship, because an opportunity can exist without any opportunity products, but an opportunity product cannot exist without an opportunity. An opportunity product is only related to one opportunity, but an opportunity can be related to as many opportunity products as we want to relate it to. So that's basically an overview of what a one-to-many relationship looks like. Now, any relationship can be like this, and you can use whatever combination of endpoints that you need to show the relationship you're trying to show. So maybe you've got a one-to-one that has the two perpendicular lines on both sides. Maybe you've got a many-to-many relationship. You can use different combinations of required or optional. Really, whatever meets the needs of what it is that you're trying to draw in your diagram. Now let's talk about a few other types of endpoints that you might want to use in your diagrams. The first is this diamond shape that you can use to identify a parent in a parent-child relationship. Now, a parent-child relationship is fairly similar to a one-to-many relationship, but with a few little nuances. So one example would be cascade delete, where if you delete the parent entity, all of the children get deleted with it. That's one example. There's other characteristics, and essentially if you want to show that, that's how you do it. The next one is an extension, and it uses the diamond symbol again because this entity essentially is a parent entity. And this child entity, there's only one of them, and instead of being its own standalone entity, it's extending the parent, which is hence the word extension. Now this last one is a recursive relationship, and this is where an entity can be its own parent. Now that sounds kind of funny, but the easiest way to think about it is with an example. So if you think about the account hierarchy in Salesforce, an account can be a parent to another account. An account can have multiple children accounts. So it's kind of like a one-to-many relationship, but notice that both sides are optional because you don't necessarily have to have that parent-child relationship between an account and another account. So these are a few other examples of some things that you might see from time to time and some things that you might want to use. Now let's talk about how we can use connectors to show relationships between more than just two entities. So if we look at this drawing, we've got three entities. There's A, there's B, and there's C. And we've got two one-to-many relationships. Now these two one-to-many relationships work the same way as any other one-to-many relationship. There's just two of them. So essentially what we're saying is that an instance of entity A has to be related to an instance of entity B, and it has to be related to an instance of entity C. So there's our AND. Now if we want to make this a mutually exclusive relationship and turn it into an OR, we can draw this half circle through our two connectors. Now what we're saying is that an instance of entity A has to be related to an instance of entity B or an instance of entity C, but not both at the same time. And you can think of that as campaign members in Salesforce. So a campaign member can be a lead or it can be a contact, but the same campaign member can't be a lead and a contact at the same time. Now what we can also do is add a fourth entity here. Let's call this one D. And we're going to draw another one-to-many relationship, but we don't want this to be part of this mutually exclusive relationship between B and C. So we're going to break the line, and we're going to draw it like that. Now what we're saying is that an instance of entity A has to be related to an instance of entity D, and it has to be related to an instance of entity B or an instance of entity C. So that's how you can show those multiple relationships and all the different AND and OR logic using connectors and endpoints. Now let's talk about using arrows as endpoints. You can use arrows when you want to add directionality to your diagrams, and there are two common use cases for them. The first one is integrations, which is what we see on the top. Here we can see that entity 1 is sending some data to entity 2, and the reason that we know the data is going from entity 1 to entity 2 is because the arrow is showing us which direction it's going in. One other side note, this oval shape around the word data is called a text pill, and you can add it to any connector when you want to add some additional details about that connector. Now I'm using it here in this example, but we could have really used it in any of the other connectors in this entire video, and they can be really useful when you need to add some additional context for your audience. The second use case for arrows is process flow diagrams, and that's what we see on the bottom. And this is where we're going from step 1 to step 2. These are kind of self-explanatory. You've probably seen them in other diagrams. They're not even specific to architecture, so they're fairly common, but it's another use case for arrows. Now, you might see arrows in a few other places, but the real key that you want to remember when you're using them is that they add an element of direction to your diagram, and that's the proper way to use them. Okay, so there's one last topic to cover, and that is how to handle scenarios where you have to show multiple connectors between the same two entities. So let's take a look at this drawing. We've got System 1 with an event bus that's publishing an event and sending it to System 2 where it's getting consumed. That's not bad, but the problem is that if we really want to show this diagram correctly, we should also show a relationship from System 2 to System 1 where System 2 is listening for that event. Now, if I just draw another arrow that looks the same but just goes in the opposite direction, it's going to be really confusing for my audience. So instead of doing that, I'm still going to draw the arrow, but I'm going to use a different color. So let's go ahead and give it a label. And then we'll draw our arrow. And now we can see that these are two distinctly different connectors. One is going from System 2 to System 1, where we're listening for the event. One is going from System 1 to System 2, where the event is being published. That's better, but it's still a little bit confusing because our audience isn't going to know what these colors mean unless we tell them. And that's where the key is going to come in. So what I'm going to do is draw two lines in the key. This should be in the header of your diagram, and we're going to use it to identify anything that might not be intuitive in the diagram itself. So I'm going to draw this line, and I'm going to call it subscribe. And then I'm going to draw another line, and I'm going to label it publish. So now we have some more context, and we can see what these two different colors mean. Now, it's important to note here too, you don't necessarily need to use different colors. If you prefer using different line styles, so maybe dashed lines versus solid lines, or different types of arrows, anything that will show distinctly different connections, The things to really remember here are make sure that you're putting something in your key so that your audience knows what those mean. And also make sure that you're being consistent throughout your diagram and throughout all of the diagrams you create. So if you're going to do something like this and show different line styles, different colors, whatever, work with your team and put together a set of standards that can be used across all of your diagrams so that everything will be consistent. Okay, so to wrap things up, today we covered how to use connectors and endpoints to show relationships between the entities in your diagrams. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to like this video if it was helpful, and also make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have a lot of other videos about how to make great Salesforce diagrams, and you're not going to want to miss any of them. Also, leave us some feedback in the comments. Let us know if you liked what you saw, let us know if there are any other topics you'd like us to cover, and if you used what you learned in this video to make your own diagram, let us know that too. Looking forward to seeing you next time.